Watch right now on the Front News Project. Russia in flames, Tatarstan and the Komi Republic under attack by the Ukrainian armed forces. Drone and missile factories are burning. A Storm Shadow analogue in Russian service, this missile is a new threat to Ukrainian cities. And also, Buravestnik is cancelled. Putin rattles the nuclear Buravestnik. Is this a new Kremlin bluff or a danger of planetary scale? Fiery, intense, and blazing footage from the front lines. Watch it right now. It's the fourth year of the full-scale war that Putin's Russia started on Ukrainian soil. The Ukrainian armed forces continue to heroically defend not only their homeland, but the entire civilized world from the aggression of Kremlin war criminals. Greetings! This is Front News. I'm Vladimir Timoshenko. For the next 30 minutes, you'll get the truth about the war, uncovered by our journalists from the hottest combat zones. So, are you ready? Then let's begin. And we're starting right away with exclusive material. The Ukrainian armed forces drones have done a great job. The Arzamas plant is in their sights. There, the Russians were producing components for the Kh-32 and Kh-101 missiles. For the first time, military facilities in the Komi Republic have also been attacked. Just to put that in perspective, that's 2,000 kilometers from the Ukrainian border. Tatarstan is also under fire, 1,000 kilometers away. And the Ukrainian armed forces have destroyed a Russian battalion command post near Oleshki. That's in the Kherson region. In addition, Azerbaijan may consider lifting its embargo on supplying weapons to Ukraine. What kind of weapons could our country receive? More on that coming up. Then we'll return to the studio.
Could it really be that US funding for Ukraine is over? Jay Devine stated that his country will no longer allocate funds for military aid, as this is now more the responsibility of the Europeans.
I think the president believes, and of course I do as well, that we will no longer fund the military business in Ukraine. We want to achieve a peaceful resolution to this issue. If the Europeans want to take the initiative and purchase weapons from American manufacturers, we have no objection, but we ourselves will no longer finance this.
But just how truly painful and challenging could such significant changes actually be for Ukraine? That's the main question.
There's really nothing new here. We understood that we would have to buy aid, that we would no longer receive anything from the US. Basically, to put it simply, we got played. Ukraine was let down in this situation. In other words, we were counting on aid that had already been funded, on weapons that have already been or are being produced, but we won't get them. If we want to get it, we have to buy it. Nothing will be free anymore.
Help came from where we least expected it. Azerbaijan may consider lifting the embargo on supplying weapons to Ukraine. And all this is a result of Russian strikes on the oil depot of an Azerbaijani company in Odessa.
They deliberately attacked it. At least 5 drones hit the site. So it was intentional. Can we say it happened by accident? No, it was a deliberate attack. Now, Mr. Aliyev has stated that if the Russian Federation doesn't calm down, they will lift the embargo specifically on military aid to Ukraine. What is this about? Most likely these are Soviet-style munitions that can be produced at Azerbaijani enterprises. Perhaps there are some large stockpiles, but nevertheless, this would be a significant help to Ukraine.
It seems that Russia has a new cruise missile. It was detected during the shelling of Mykolaiv. In terms of appearance, it is compared to the British-French Storm Shadow, and conceptually, to the Ukrainian Peklo. But the Russians are not only striking Ukraine with missiles, they are also increasingly using drones. Now they have established their first UAV control center in Kamchatka.
As I see it, this is more of a preparation. Another question is, why so far away? Well, maybe they're training some of their own. Again, maybe it's to keep things farther away from any prying eyes, from outsiders. Why Kamchatka specifically? Well, it's hard to say. Maybe it's the hills, maybe they're trying to simulate the Donbas region.
But what's Russia without a little bavovna? Ukrainian Shaheds struck the assembly points for Russian Shaheds in Kazan, which by the way is more than 1,000 kilometers from the state border. But that's not all the surprises. An oil refinery in Russia's Komi Republic, which supplied fuel to the Russian army, was also hit. And the distance to it from the Ukrainian border is about 2,000 kilometers.
Well, it's quite possible that this was a kind of test flight to figure out what's needed, like how much fuel to calculate, how much explosives. Well, most likely over time we'll see even longer range strikes. But we have to understand that such strikes will most likely only be carried out against highly explosive targets. For example, there's no point in sending it to some factory 2,000 kilometers away because this drone can't really do anything there. But to blow up something very energy intensive, for example.
It is also known that the Ukrainian armed forces carried out a bombing strike on a Russian command post in the Oleshki area of Kherson region and destroyed it.
According to preliminary information, about 25 occupiers were killed and at least 11 were wounded. According to intelligence reports, among those eliminated were the commander, the chief of staff, the head of the engineering service, and the commander of one of the battalion's platoons.
In Zaporizhzhia, on the morning of August 10th, Russian forces struck the bus station, where people were injured.
That's all.
According to the latest information, 20 people sustained injuries of varying severity. The strikes also hit the clinic of Zaporizhzhia Medical University and residential buildings.
And now, an analysis of the operational situation on the long-suffering Pokrovsk sector of the front. The situation here is, as usual, extremely tense. On the Pokrovsk sector, Russian forces attempted to advance 17 times on our positions in the areas of the settlements of Poltavka, Vladimirovka, Uyut, Kucheryov Yar, Zapovednoye, Krasny Lyman, Mirolyubovka, Suketskaya, Chunishino, Zverevo, Kotlino, Orekhovoye, and Fedorovka. Our defenders have already repelled 15 attacks. The fighting does not subside. And here is more troubling news from the lair of the Russian occupiers. Russia has introduced a new cruise missile into service, and it has already been launched at Ukraine during the bombing of Mykolaiv. In appearance, it resembles the British-French Storm Shadow, and in concept, the Ukrainian Peklo missile. All the details are known by our journalists.
Russia has a new cruise missile, the first of its kind for the occupying army. It has already been used against Ukrainian territory.
One cruise missile, a jet-powered drone, a parcel headed toward Mykolaiv from the south.
These reports appeared on the morning of August 7th, but it wasn't a parcel. By the way, it's also a new addition to the occupiers' arsenal. But this was something even newer. Later, another Telegram channel published images of the downed missile.
Almost every country in the world has a cruise missile that can be launched from under the wing of tactical aircraft and strike targets over 500 kilometers away. Russia did not have such a missile. That's why it was important for them to develop such a weapon, and naturally it was bound to appear or has already appeared.
The first thing that caught everyone's eye was that, externally, the new Russian cruise missile looks like a scaled-down version of the British-French Storm Shadow cruise missile.
After we have successfully used our Storm Shadow missiles on the sovereign territory of the Russian Federation, after we have deployed our attack AMS, after we have utilized our own domestically produced cruise missiles, which we consistently use for various strikes, whether they are drone missile attacks or something else entirely, that is, they had the opportunity to acquire certain technological capabilities. Because, again, I'll say that Russia doesn't know how to invent something new, but it does know how to copy or to scale up and modernize existing things. Therefore, I would say that most likely they received some clarifications on issues where they couldn't make progress. And thanks to this, they created means with which they now want to actively strike further at Ukrainian territory.
The specifications of the new Russian cruise missile are unknown, but it is noted that it is conceptually similar to the Ukrainian Peklo missile. The latter has a range of up to 700 kilometers and can reach speeds of up to 700 kilometers per hour. The warhead of the Peklo weighs more than 50 kilograms.
Taking into account the Chinese jet engine that is installed. That's a separate issue, by the way. Russia uses jet engines of Chinese manufacture. So they buy a Chinese engine, install it on this missile, and naturally, with such a payload and such weight and size characteristics, achieving those speeds, 500 to 700 kilometers per hour, is quite possible.
It is also known that the new cruise missile is launched from a drone. Its launch from the Orion drone has been confirmed. In theory, the missile can be launched from tactical aircraft, but so far launches from planes have not been recorded. One of the open questions is also at what stage of development the Russian cruise missile currently is.
Basically, if I'm not mistaken, this is possibly the third or fourth use of this missile on Ukrainian territory. So this indicates that they made some modifications, launched it, checked it, made some more modifications, allowed it, modified it, allowed it, checked it. Moreover, we understand that they launch it from the sea, from an area where there are few radar systems that would allow for effective detection of this missile, especially since it flies at low altitudes. In other words, the principle of classical radar does not apply, because classical radar works from 500 meters and above.
So far, only one thing is known. Russia has indeed created its first short or medium-range cruise missile, and the frequency of their launches is only a matter of time. We need to be prepared for this.
And now we move to the Kramatorsk and Toretsk directions of the front. The enemy army's bloody rampage continues here as well. In the Kramatorsk direction, our defenders repelled 3 attacks by the occupiers. The enemy carried out offensive actions, trying to advance in the areas of Novomarkove, Chasiv Yar, and toward Bila Hora. The defense forces stopped 7 enemy attacks in the Toretsk direction. The invader tried to advance in the areas of the settlements of Delivka, Toretsk, Oleksandro Kalinove, Katerinivka, and toward Rusiniv Yar and Pleshchevka. Currently, scenarios for ending the war between Russia and Ukraine are being actively discussed around the world. Western analysts have predicted 5 likely scenarios with a set of conditions under which Ukraine, defending its land, and terrorist Russia would cease hostilities. We will tell you more about these scenarios, and you can decide for yourself which one seems the most realistic. Let us know your thoughts in the comments.
A nightmare for Europe and Afghanistan for Moscow, a freeze and territorial losses for Kyiv. Against the backdrop of progress in negotiations between Ukraine, the US and Russia, American media have predicted several possible scenarios for how events might unfold. 5 possible outcomes for ending the Russian-Ukrainian war. The Kremlin's goal in negotiations with Trump is to buy time, both regarding sanctions and military aid to Ukraine, as well as to establish personal contacts between Putin and the US president. The last thing Moscow is interested in right now in such negotiations and meetings is a ceasefire and an end to hostilities.
We can see that Putin has backed down. Putin realized, apparently economists explained to him what it would mean essentially to lose the main source of revenue for the military budget. And this most likely threatens a complete economic collapse in the medium term. That's why Putin is now trying, let's say, to play many cards at once in order to deliberately slip the card of the Russian-Ukrainian war just into the deck.
The least likely scenario, as rightly noted by the American media, is Putin agreeing to an unconditional ceasefire in Ukraine. Ukraine has expressed its readiness to accept the US proposal for the immediate introduction of a temporary 30-day ceasefire, which may be extended by mutual agreement of the parties, provided it is accepted and simultaneously implemented by the Russian Federation. Since at least March, the Russian dictator has refused the 30-day ceasefire proposed by the White House, using various false pretexts and formulations. My conversations with Putin are always very pleasant, very lively discussions. And then, that very night, the missiles fly. I come home and tell the First Lady, you know, I spoke with Vladimir today, we had a wonderful conversation. And she's like, oh, really? They've just struck another city. Following Putin's predictable refusal to cease hostilities, experts are discussing 2 diametrically opposed scenarios. The first scenario, a nightmare for Europe, will occur if Putin manages to sway Trump and the US leaves Ukraine one-on-one with Russia. European leaders do not have a political mandate to enter the war inside Ukraine. Putin advances further. NATO cannot provide a unified response. This is a nightmare for Europe and the end of a sovereign Ukraine. At this crossroads, the balance of power depends entirely on the position of the White House. After all, if military support for Ukraine continues and new significant sanctions are imposed on Russia and its allies, a catastrophe is predicted for Putin. The war with Ukraine will end for Moscow much worse than Afghanistan did.
The beloved motherland is truly proud of you. The motherland sincerely thanks you, and the motherland absolutely counts on you for its future.
That was the last night our soldiers spent on Afghan soil.
Massive Russian casualties at the front, a shortage of petrodollars, reduced revenues and spending on armaments, and a deepening economic crisis within the country. Kremlin geostrategists have already experienced something similar on the eve of the collapse of the USSR. The Kremlin may face a moment when its resistance to the banal and minor inconveniences of reality, as well as to the economic hardships of its own people, becomes fatal for it. A similar short-sighted political calculation ultimately led to the fruitless Soviet occupation of Afghanistan. The most likely scenario, according to the media and experts, is the continuation of negotiations accompanied by ongoing hostilities, at least until mid-autumn. The US will continue its current course, applying pressure on Moscow and supporting Kyiv. And for now, Putin is satisfied with the current equation, the lives of tens of thousands of Russians in exchange for minimal advances across scorched Ukrainian land.
They will keep fighting the Russians as long as they have the opportunity until the rainy season begins. But that is in fact the end of October or the beginning of November, depending on the weather. And then, yes, then they will move on to political agreements along the line of demarcation. I think they will compromise on their previous demands regarding, the 5 regions. That's it. But at the same time, yes, indeed, until that particular moment, they will undoubtedly make every possible effort now to achieve, well, the absolute maximum on the battlefield.
At the same time, no progress toward achieving peace is possible without further participation in negotiations by Ukraine and Europe. Putin's dream is a private deal with Trump, as a result of which the war will continue and Washington will turn its back on the European continent.
And now, an analysis of the operational situation on the Novopavlivka sector of the front. The Russian world continues here as well to destroy, kill, and maim. On the Novopavlivka direction, Ukrainian defenders repelled 7 enemy attacks near the settlements of Zeleny High, Volnepol, Timirivka, Mirn, Oleksandrograd, Voskresenka, Shevchenko, and Olhivske. 4 enemy attacks are still ongoing. Meanwhile, Russia is once again brandishing its nuclear club, this time with the Buravestnik missile, also known as the nuclear Chernobyl. These Kremlin plans are evidenced by increased activity at the Pankovo test site on the Novaya Zemlya archipelago. We will talk about yet another attempt by the Russian Federation to escalate nuclear confrontation and what all of this could ultimately lead to. Let's watch.
Russia is preparing new tests of one of its 5 types of so-called wonder weapons. We're talking about the Buravestnik missile, which has been dubbed the Flying Chernobyl in the United States, all because of its nuclear engine.
The missile is inherently dangerous because if the reactor is destroyed, if it unfortunately gets shot down, or if it tragically crashes or experiences a severe accident, a significantly large, well, quite a substantial area will be contaminated, and absolutely no sane or reasonable person would ever desire or wish for such a catastrophic outcome. That's why the Americans abandoned this environmentally unfriendly project back then.
Nuclear weapons expert Decker Everett has pointed out that the Kremlin is preparing to test its so-called no-analogues weapon. According to him, this is evidenced by increased activity at the Pankovo test site on the Novaya Zemlya archipelago. In addition, the possibility of tests is indicated by the fact that the United States has sent an Air Force radiation reconnaissance aircraft to Novaya Zemlya. This aircraft is equipped with sensors for monitoring nuclear tests. Later, the SVC noted that the aircraft took off from the British airbase Middleton Hall and circled over the Barents Sea for about 14 hours.
If it explodes, it will contaminate everything around it. That's precisely why, as soon as the Russians commence talking about meticulously planning to test something and begin to actively and demonstrably flex their military wings, some dedicated American reconnaissance plane or highly sensitive radiation level monitor is immediately dispatched to that specific area, diligently starts circling, and comprehensively records absolutely everything that's happening there.
The development of the Buravestnik began in Russia back in 2001, but it was only in 2018 that Putin publicly announced it. He did so with great pomp. He claimed that its range was unlimited and its flight path could be unpredictable. During this time, Russia tested the Buravestnik 13 times, and all attempts ended in failure, although one is actually considered a success. That time, the Russian wonder weapon managed to fly a whole 35 kilometers.
Out of 13 launches, all were unsuccessful. One launch when the missile flew 35 kilometers in 2 minutes. And this is considered the most successful launch because at that time they managed to record all the parameters they wanted to capture. There's also a theory that when the major accident happened in Yonoksa, that accident, that catastrophe where people died and there was a significant radiation release, was connected. One version is that it was related to this Buravestnik missile.
Putin didn't pull the Buravestnik out of his nuclear arsenal for no reason. This is just another tool for intimidation.
There's a whole frenzy being stirred up around this. Russia is portrayed as terrifyingly large, terrifyingly powerful, with a whole arsenal of weapons, 5,500 nuclear warheads, though, to be honest, no one knows what condition they're in. But aside from burst, probably no one knows. Moving on. The deadline for Trump's ultimatum is approaching, and now something needs to be done. That's why airspace over Kapustin Yar is being closed, so that everyone starts wondering what will be tested there. Maybe the Buravestnik missile will be launched, or maybe something else. And the whole world gets tense. Then there are announcements that the Buravestnik missile will be tested again, or something else.
Can the Russians conduct a Buravestnik test? They probably can. Will it be successful? In Russia, they'll say yes, but as previous test statistics show, only the Russians themselves are likely to suffer from this launch.
Now let's discuss the situation on the Kupansk and Lyman fronts. Putin's Russia is acting true to form here as well. On the Kupansk front, since the beginning of the day, the enemy has advanced 4 times against the positions of our defenders near the settlements of Radkivka, Kondrashivka, Petropavlivka, and Stepna Novoselivka, and at present 2 clashes are still ongoing. On the Lyman front, there have been 8 combat engagements today, 5 of which are still ongoing. The enemy attacked in the areas of the settlements of Karpivka, Kolodyasy, and in the direction of Shandryholov and Dronivka. Several hundred Russian servicemen and several dozen pieces of equipment from the Russian Federation have already arrived in Belarus for the military exercises scheduled for September. Ukrainians already know very well that these so-called exercises in Belarus bode nothing good for us. So what awaits us in 2025? Is it possible that the terrible scenario of 2022 could repeat itself when it was from Belarusian territory that the Russians advanced on Kyiv? Let's watch the report and draw the appropriate conclusions.
The first train carrying Russian troops and equipment has arrived in Belarus. Everything is by the book, loud statements and promises of strong friendship. But what is really behind this new wave of allied activity?
As of today, the military alliance between Russia and Belarus is an essential condition for the further development of our states. This is of great importance given the current threats. With the start of the special military operation, this became one of the top priorities, said a serviceman of the Russian armed forces.
The Belarusian Ministry of Defense immediately reported preparations have begun for the strategic exercises Zapad 2025, which are scheduled for September. They insist that the maneuvers are supposedly routine and are held every 2 years. But history teaches us it was precisely under the guise of exercises in 2021 that Russia moved troops to the Ukrainian border and already at the beginning of 2022 launched a full-scale invasion.
The very first echelons, complete with their military equipment, that have recently arrived in the sovereign nation of Belarus can be effectively utilized both for the crucial practicing of coordination and for the subsequent significant buildup of formidable strike forces.
And although the official scenario of the exercises is still classified, its direction is obvious. After all, the playbook is the same, the scenario is the same, troop transfers, the creation of a strike force, preparation for future operations, all the things the aggressor used to launch the large-scale war against Ukraine.
In this case, coordination between Ukraine and our Western partners is necessary in order to send a signal, I believe, not only to the Russian Federation, but also to Belarus about the inadmissibility of using these exercises as a cover for preparing offensive actions. After all, we understand that the Russians still have the temptation, for example, to open a northern front against Ukraine or to launch a special operation against, say, the Suwałki corridor. Obviously, that would involve Poland, that would involve Lithuania. There are various scenarios.
The key question remains the scale. So far, the official statements mention 12, 13 or 14,000 servicemen. However, according to the intelligence services of the Baltic states, up to 150,000 troops could be involved in the maneuvers. If these numbers are confirmed, it would be the largest concentration of forces on NATO's eastern flank in recent years.
The Russian Federation and its close ally Belarus will likely downplay the actual precise number of servicemen participating in these significant military exercises, potentially to avoid international scrutiny. Therefore, the risks will remain. But let's carefully observe and see to what significant extent, in this particular case, the comprehensive preventive process will actually work, ensuring a more robust outcome. After all, we remember how even Kellogg himself came to visit Lukashenko. We also distinctly remember a significant number of statements and the extensive redeployment of those very same German Eurofighter jets to Poland, and many, many other crucial actions involving the direct redeployment of military servicemen directly to NATO's eastern flank, which is a critical area.
At the same time, other alarming steps are emerging. For example, Belarus will form a new airborne assault brigade. Where do you think? Of course, right at the Ukrainian border. This was announced by the commander of the Belarusian Special Operations Forces, Vadim Denisenko. According to him, the units are being stationed in the Gomel region, north of Chernihiv and Kiev regions.
As of today, this is the most, so to speak, worrisome direction, which keeps all of us on alert. Therefore, a decision was made to create a separate airborne assault brigade there. And as of today, we have already begun forming this brigade. One of the battalions has already been formed.
We're talking about the 37th Guards Airborne Assault Brigade. Its formation is part of a large-scale strengthening of the Belarusian army. New artillery and anti-aircraft missile units are also being created. And on top of that, the parliament is discussing rewriting the law on martial law to expand the powers of the president, the Security Council, and the Ministry of Defense.
Putin is currently relying on several pillars. The first pillar is the belief that the Ukrainian response is an anomaly and that such resistance will not occur in European countries. The second significant assertion being made is that Article 5 of the NATO-Washington Treaty, which outlines the principle of collective defense, is fundamentally a myth, and that the alliance, despite its stated commitments, will not be able to provide an adequate or sufficiently robust response in the event of an attack or crisis, thereby undermining its credibility and effectiveness. And the third crucial pillar is the deeply held belief that China will significantly strengthen the strategic position of the Russian Federation in terms of extensive economic and vital political cooperation, since it is profoundly beneficial for China to effectively put the United States in a considerably difficult position. This strategic way, while the US is fully preoccupied with Russia and Europe, China can then more readily resolve the long-standing Taiwan issue.
Without a doubt, the Zapad 2025 exercises are a challenge not only to Ukraine, but to the entire region. Despite the fact that, according to the Ukrainian State Border Guard Service, there are currently no signs of a threat to our country, Kyiv is preparing for any scenario, just like its Western allies. Poland has already responded to the actions of Moscow and Minsk by announcing its own large-scale exercises, Iron Defender, with the participation of NATO allies. The question now is whether time will show if these exercises remain merely a show of force or become yet another round of escalation.
That's all for today. But very soon on Front News, you'll see new, unique reports from our journalists in the hottest spots of the war, gathered so that you know the truth. This was Volodymyr Tymoshenko with you. Take care of yourselves and your loved ones.